The sun hung high over the parched earth, casting long shadows that danced across the dry ground of Malachi Brooks's remote homestead. Sweat dripped from his brow as he knelt by the broken fence post, his hands rough with years of labor. The air shimmered with heat, deadening sound as he focused on the task at hand, the distant mountains hazy against the relentless blue sky. Suddenly, a muted thud broke the stillness, an irregular sound that didn't fit into the rhythm of solitude he had grown accustomed to. Malachi lifted his head, squinting against the harsh light. His heart raced as he caught sight of four figures sprawled at the gate, their forms crumpled and fragile against the wooden slats. He dropped his tools and rushed to the fence, his boots crunching against the dry soil, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. "Who?" he breathed, the word catching in his throat as he recognized the dark hair, the worn clothes. They were girls, young, native girls, their bodies shrouded in dust and despair. The smallest among them was curled up tightly, her thin arms wrapped around her knees like a frightened rabbit. "Help!" a voice whispered, barely more than a breeze, but it carried a weight that sent a jolt through Malachi. The oldest girl stirred, her dark eyes flashing with urgency as they met his own. "Please," she gasped, struggling to speak. "They're coming." A surge of something primal rushed through him, fear, desperation. But it was the fierceness in her gaze that anchored him. It reminded him of someone he tried hard to forget, someone whose strength had once lit a darkened path. For a moment, he felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to crack. "Stay back," he cautioned, instinctively taking a step backward, his heart pounding against his ribs. "You shouldn't have come here." The girl's brow furrowed, and she pushed herself to a sitting position, her body trembling. "We have no choice," she cried, the plea echoing through the dusty air. "You're the only one who can help us." Malachi glanced behind her toward the horizon. A dust cloud was rising, a menacing shape against the blue. His skin prickled with dread. "They're hunting us," she continued, her voice strong but laced with fear. "You don't understand. If they find us—" She shook her head, refusing to finish the thought. Malachi's mind raced. 10 years of isolation. 10 years spent hiding from the memories of a violent past. He had sworn to leave it all behind, to be forgotten by the world. Yet here were these girls, embodiments of a darkness he thought he had outrun. "I can't," he said, his throat dry. "You don't know what you're asking." The girl stared at him, her determination sharpening like the edge of a knife. "We've seen things you can't imagine. You think you're safe here? They've found us before. They'll find you again if you turn away." A pang of guilt hit him, twisting in his gut. He was not the man he once had been, not the protector, not the hero. But he could see the fear in her eyes, the flicker of hope waiting to be ignited. He swallowed hard, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. The thought of bloodshed, of violence, clenched around his heart. But what he saw in the girl's eyes, their pain, their fear, was a reflection of his own lost innocence. "I've got supplies, but we need to move. Now." He stepped forward, the resolve beginning to settle in his bones, even as the weight of memory hung heavily on his shoulders. The oldest girl, whose name he hadn't yet learned, nodded fiercely, relief mixing with disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered, holding out a trembling hand. "I'm Ayanna." "Malachi," he replied, clasping her hand for a brief moment. It felt like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. "Quickly," Ayanna urged, looking back toward the dust cloud that was gathering speed. "They won't be far behind." Malachi nodded and took a deep breath, the acrid smell of desert dust filling his lungs. He turned and moved toward the cabin, his heart pounding against his chest. As he opened the door, the sunlight poured into the small space, illuminating the rough-hewn furniture and the faint traces of a life he had chosen to leave behind. "Inside!" he barked, waving the girls forward. They stumbled into the cabin, a whirlwind of dark hair and dirt-streaked faces. The youngest clung to Ayana's arm, her wide eyes darting around the room with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Is this where we'll be safe?" she asked, her voice small, trembling like a leaf in the wind. "For now," Malachi replied, moving to secure the door behind them. His mind raced with possibilities and dangers, each pulse of his heart a reminder that the past was not so easily buried. The second oldest girl, Ka, sank onto a chair, her forehead damp with sweat, while Nayeli remained close to her sister, watching Malachi with wide eyes. Ayana, despite her exhaustion, refused to sit. She stood at the door, listening intently to the sound of hoofbeats growing closer. "What do we do now?" Ayana's voice was steady, but beneath it lay an edge of urgency that cut through the tension. Malachi turned back to them, his hands resting on the worn surface of the table, the wood slick with age. "We prepare." A chill ran through the room as if the very walls absorbed the urgency of their situation. He moved to the corner where a faded map lay spread beneath layers of dust, the edges frayed like the remnants of his past. Kneeling down, he traced the outlines of familiar trails that had long been forgotten. "There's a safe house," he muttered, almost to himself. "About a day's ride from here." "What about supplies?" Ka asked, her voice strained, fingers intertwined, as if trying to hold on to something solid in a sea of uncertainty. "Just enough," Malachi replied, feeling the shift in the air, a premonition that the calm before the storm was nearing its end. "We can pack food and water, but we'll have to be quick." Nellie, still clinging to Ayana, caught a glimpse of the map. "Are there monsters out there?" she whispered, her voice trembling like a fragile bird. Malachi met her gaze, the depth of his own fears reflected in her innocent question. "No monsters, just men who've lost their way. They're worse." Silence filled the cabin, heavy and suffocating, until Ayana spoke up again, her brow knitted in thought. "Can you fight them?" The question hung in the air, thick with implication. Malachi's heart thudded, a question he had long since buried beneath years of solitude. "I can," he finally said, realizing the truth lay deeper than mere physicality. It was the ghosts of the past, those haunting figures that turned a man's heart cold, that he feared most. "Then we'll fight with you," Ayana declared, fire igniting in her eyes. "We're not just going to run." Malachi shook his head, overwhelmed by the defiance radiating from her, the flicker of rebellion sparking in the young girls beside her. "You don't understand what you're asking for. This isn't just a fight. This is survival." Behind him, outside the cabin, the hoofbeats grew louder. Malachi's stomach dropped. "We don't have much time," he said, urgency slicing through him. "Get what you can carry." The girls moved quickly, rummaging through cabinets and bags, their small bodies darting around the cramped space. He watched them, struck by how they transformed from frightened shadows into warriors in their own right. Ayana, directing, Ka gathering, Nayeli holding fast to her sister. The floor creaked underfoot, and Malachi felt the walls closing in, an invisible weight pushing against him. He turned back to the map, eyes narrowing at the scrawled lines leading out of the valley. Just then, a distant shout echoed from outside. cutting through the tension like a knife. The hairs on the back of his neck stood tall. "They're here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to move. Now." The girls froze, the reality of their situation settling in like the dusk creeping through the windows. In that moment, they were no longer just girls. This was a pact forged in fear, desperation, and an unyielding resolve. Malachi tore the map from the table, folding it quickly as he glanced back at the door. "Follow me, and stay close." He led them towards the back exit, the air thick with anticipation. As he opened the door, the scent of sun-baked earth swirled in like an invitation and a warning. Just outside, the dust swirled in ominous patterns, the sun casting long shadows across the ground. The distant figures of riders emerged, silhouetted against the setting sun, a reminder of the danger that loomed just beyond the sanctuary of the cabin. Malachi's breath caught in his throat. There was no turning back now. He stepped outside, the wooden door creaking ominously as it swung open, and a gust of warm air brushed against his skin, carrying the scent of pine and the distant echo of hooves. The girls huddled close, eyes wide, their breath synchronized in a shared rhythm of dread. "Stay low," he instructed, his voice steady despite the tumult in his chest. As they crouched behind a thicket of brush, a wildflower bloom caught his attention, vivid and tenacious against the rugged terrain, defying the harshness of its surroundings. It felt like a sign, something to hold on to in the darkening world. He scanned the horizon, heart pounding like thunder in his ears, as he gestured for them to follow him along the edge of the clearing. Each step was calculated, the ground beneath them crackling with dry leaves and twigs, a warning of their movement to anyone who might be listening. The riders' shouts echoed like distant thunder, a storm brewing just out of sight. "Malachi, what if they see us?" Ka whispered, her eyes darting nervously towards the commotion. "Then we run," he replied, the plan forming in his mind, simple yet fraught with peril. "But they won't be looking for kids." Not yet. He hoped his words would hold, but the unease gnawed at him like a persistent itch. As they moved farther from the cabin, the landscape shifted, rising into a series of jagged hills that loomed like ancient sentinels. The sun dipped lower, casting an orange hue across the sky, but shadows grew long and menacing. Nayeli stumbled, catching herself on a gnarled root, and for a heartbeat, the world paused. "What if we don't make it?" she whispered, vulnerability breaking through her fierce facade. Malachi knelt beside her, meeting her gaze. "Then we'll make sure each other does," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "No one gets left behind." The promise hung between them, a fragile thread woven from courage and desperation. They pressed on, climbing the incline, heartbeats synchronizing with the distant chaos. A rustle in the underbrush sent a jolt of fear through him. Instinctively, he turned, scanning the tree line. Just ahead, he spotted a narrow path carved into the slope, barely visible through the thicket. "Over there," he urged, pointing towards the path. "That'll take us away from them." With renewed determination, they sprinted toward the opening, the thorns snagging at their clothes as they passed. Malachi led the way, each step a silent prayer that they wouldn't be followed, that the riders would lose interest before it was too late. The path twisted upward, surrounded by towering pines that whispered secrets in the wind. Malachi could feel the presence of the world around him shifting, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future coiling tight in his chest. "Look!" Ayana cried out, her voice a sharp contrast to the quiet tension. He turned to see her pointing at a hidden cave mouth just off the path, shadowed and inviting. Could be a good place to hide, he considered, catching a glimpse of movement behind them, a flicker of dark shapes against the golden light. But we have to decide fast. Let's go, Ayana insisted, the strength of her conviction resonating in him. It's better than being out in the open. With a nod, he led them into the cave, the cool darkness enveloping them like a cloak. They paused just inside, hearts racing, breaths echoing off the rock walls. Malachi pressed his back against the cold stone, listening intently as the sounds of pursuit grew closer. The riders' voices now sharper, more distinct. "Stay quiet," he whispered, eyes darting toward the entrance, where the light began to fade, the last remnants of dusk spilling into the cave like spilled ink. As they settled into the shadows, he felt a flicker of hope, a fragile thread woven tighter by their choice to stand together. The storm was upon them, but they would face it as one. The cave's mouth loomed behind them, a portal to uncertainty, but it also offered a moment of respite. Malachi could taste the damp air, tinged with earth and moss, heavy with the scent of hidden life. He strained to hear, the sounds of the riders now mingling with the rustle of small creatures scuttling in the underbrush outside. "Do you think they'll find us?" Ka whispered, her voice barely above a murmur, as if sound itself could betray them. "Not if we stay still," he replied, though the creeping doubt lingered like an unwelcome shadow. The darkness felt thick, as though it could swallow them whole. But he focused on the flicker of hope within, an ember that refused to die. The interior of the cave revealed jagged rocks that jutted out like teeth, glistening in the fading light. Malachi's fingers brushed against the rough surface, grounding him, reminding him that they were still here, still fighting. A faint drip echoed from deeper within, like the heartbeat of the earth, steady and unyielding. As they huddled together, he caught Ayana's eye, and in that shared glance, an unspoken understanding passed between them. They were all tethered by a thread of resolve, one that bound them against the fear creeping into their hearts. "Let's keep moving deeper," he suggested quietly, glancing back towards the entrance. He could see shadows dancing just outside, the riders dismounting with frustrated shouts and crashing through the underbrush, their search relentless. "We can't risk being seen." With a nod, they crept further into the cave, their footsteps muted on the damp ground. The tunnel twisted, leading them away from the chaos, but the darkness deepened, thick enough to feel like a shroud. As they rounded a bend, the air grew cooler, and the walls closed in, forming narrow passages that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of their breaths. Malachi reached out to brush the cave wall again, feeling strange etchings beneath his fingertips, carvings that hinted at forgotten stories and lives long past. He wondered who had come here before, who had sought refuge in this place. Was it a sanctuary or a trap? The thought tugged at him, but he pushed it aside. There was no time for doubt. "Hey," Nellie said, breaking the silence, her voice a soft tremor. "What if we're stuck in here?" "Then we make our own way," he replied, forcing confidence into his tone. "We'll find a way out." He glanced back at the cave entrance, a sliver of light marking their escape route. "But first, we have to listen." They paused, hearts thudding in unison, each breath a reminder of the gravity of their situation. The shouts of the riders carried through the night, echoing off the stone walls. A distant yet menacing reminder that danger was merely a heartbeat away. Suddenly, a rustling sound echoed from deeper within the cave, and Malachi's stomach dropped. It was low and guttural, a growl that vibrated through the ground like thunder, sending chills racing down his spine. "Did you hear that?" Ka whispered, eyes wide with fear. "Yeah," he breathed, the weight of the threat hanging heavy in the air. "We need to move. Now." They edged further into the darkness, driven not just by fear of the riders, but now by the unknown terror lurking within the cave. The world outside might have been closing in, but in this moment they were bound by something deeper, a thread of survival, pulling them closer as they ventured into the heart of the mountain, where the storm of the night threatened to meet them head-on. The growl reverberated again, more insistent now, a warning that sent them scuttling deeper into the abyss. Malachi led the way, his senses heightened, straining to catch every sound, every shift in the air. The narrow passage twisted like a serpent, walls slick with moisture, almost breathing with them. A faint shimmer caught his eye. The walls glinted with flecks of quartz, tiny stars embedded in the stone, hinting at a beauty that felt almost sacrilegious against their grim reality. "Keep close," he urged, stealing glances back at his companions. The flicker of fear in their eyes reflected his own doubts, but he willed himself to be the anchor. The low growl persisted, pulsing in rhythm with his heart, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were trespassing where they had no right to tread. They turned another corner, and the tunnel opened slightly, revealing a small chamber. Bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls, casting an eerie blue glow that danced like ghosts in the shadows. It was beautiful, surreal, but they didn't have time to linger. The tension crackled in the air. He could almost feel the growl coiling around them, hungry and waiting. "Look!" Naeli pointed at the far wall, her voice trembling. Scrawled across the stone was a rough depiction. Figures clashing, wild and untamed, caught in an eternal struggle. It was a mural of conflict, a glimpse into a past where perhaps others had sought shelter, only to find themselves in peril. Those markings. Ayana stepped closer, her brow furrowing as she studied the artwork. "Do you think they meant to warn us? Or it's just a tale of survival, like ours," Ka replied, her fingers brushing the damp surface, tracing the lines. "They fought for their lives too." "Enough history," Malachi urged, cutting through their wonder. "We can't stay here. We need to keep moving." He took a deep breath, pushing aside the allure of the chamber, turning toward the other exit, a narrow crack that led deeper into the dark. There might be another way out on the other side. As they squeezed through the narrow opening, the growl surged again, louder, echoing through the cave like a distant storm, a primal warning that stirred something primal within him. They pressed forward, the glow of the fungi fading behind them, swallowed by the shadows. Suddenly, the ground shifted beneath Malachi's feet. A small rock slipped away, tumbling into darkness. He stumbled, instinctively reaching for the wall, feeling the pulse of the cave under his fingertips, reminding him that they were alive, that they were not yet defeated. "Stay steady," he commanded as the others clung to him, panic rising like bile in his throat. The growl morphed into something more. An echoing snarl that resonated through the stone, a sound so visceral it felt alive, like the very mountain was awakening. With every step into the unknown, the air thickened, charged with tension. The cave wasn't just a refuge, it was an entity, one that watched and listened, an ancient guardian of secrets best left undisturbed. As they ventured further, the thread of hope twisted tighter, binding them not just to each other, but to the labyrinthine depths that cradled both danger and possibility, urging them forward into the dark embrace of the unknown. The crack widened, and they emerged into a passage that arched overhead like a cathedral, the ceiling lost to shadows. Malachi raised his torch, illuminating the intricate patterns of stone that spiraled upward, resembling the twisting branches of an ancient tree, roots reaching for the depths below. It was both majestic and foreboding, a testament to time's relentless passage, hinting at untold stories buried in the earth. "Did you hear that?" Ayana whispered, her voice barely above a breath, eyes darting to the walls as if they held the answers. A sudden shift in the air made Malachi freeze. The growl had transformed again, morphing into a low rumble, as though the mountain itself was shifting. Dust fell from the ceiling like rain, and he gripped the torch tighter, its flickering light casting demonic shadows that danced across the stone. "Move," he snapped, urgency clawing at his throat. They pushed deeper into the chamber, the air thickening with each step, laden with moisture and something metallic that stung the nostrils. The blue glow from the fungi now seemed like the last vestiges of a dream fading away, leaving only the cold, hard truth of their predicament. Ahead, a fissure split the ground, jagged and yawning like the maw of a beast, waiting to swallow them whole. Malachi could feel the heat radiating from it, a stark contrast to the chill that seeped through their bones, and he stepped cautiously, peering into the abyss. A low hiss echoed from within, a warning that prickled his skin. "Do you think it's—" Nayeli began, but was cut short as another growl reverberated, sharper this time, echoing off the walls. "Not now," Malachi barked, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. "We've got to keep moving. Find an exit." Khan knelt beside the fissure, her fingers brushing against the ground. "This is different. Something's down there," she murmured, her brow knitted in concentration. "Maybe—" "No," he interrupted, fear and frustration bubbling over. "We don't have the luxury to be curious. If there's something down there, we need to go." They retreated from the edge, tension taut in the air. The growl escalated into a snarl, reverberating through the very stone. Malachi felt his heart race, a primal urge to flee pulsing through him. They turned back into the passage, desperation fueling their strides, but the shadows seemed to stretch and twist, almost as if alive, hungry for their retreat. As they rounded another bend, a glint caught Malachi's eye, a small silver object half buried in the ground. He hesitated, curiosity gnawing at him, but the urgent growl echoed in his mind, reminding him of their purpose. He forced himself to look away, but not before Nayeli bent down, her fingers wrapping around the object. "What is it?" he asked, his voice edged with impatience, yet something in her gaze stopped him. "It's a locket," she breathed, brushing dirt off its surface. "There's something inside." "Not now, Nayeli. We can't afford distractions." He glanced back at the narrowing passage, the oppressive weight of the cave pressing down on them. "But," she began, her voice faltering under the weight of his intensity. "Just hold on to it. We need to get out," he said sharply, forcing himself to keep moving. The growl surged again, closer now, and the urgency surged within him, propelling them forward, deeper into the embrace of the mountain, where secrets lay intertwined with the shadows, and the threat of something far more dangerous awaited them just beyond the reach of their flickering light.